Welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Here at the show, we have Teddy Klug. He is a clinical research fellow and he co-wrote the Kevin MD article, Gender Disparities in Medicine, How Popular Literature Mirrors 2020 Society. Teddy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
My background is in English, specifically comparative literature and poetry, but I graduated from med school this past May from the University of Arkansas, and so with those seemingly very different components to my education, I tried to find a way to combine my English background with my interest in science. And so in college, I started taking a deeper look into medicine within Charles Dickens novels. And so I found that, interestingly enough, illness was more often than not associated with female, and disease was associated with male. And so at the time, that was not really the focus of what my thesis was, but I always kept that in the back of my mind. And after graduating from medical school and doing research this year, and with all that's been going on in the political culture and then currently in the news and just with the pandemic, it came back to me that, that's something important moving forward to look at. And so I dove headfirst into that topic again, and really have been looking back at literature as a whole, and the theme of illness and disease applying to different genders. It's prevalent, not just throughout Charles Dickens novels, but throughout all of literature. And in my mind, literature a lot of times mirrors what's happening in current day society. And so it seems that those same themes are continuing today.
Excellent. So let's dive into that article that you co-wrote. It's titled Gender Disparities in Medicine, How Popular Literature Mirrors 2020 Society. Now, for those who didn't read the article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you and your co-authors decided to write it?
Yes, so I co-wrote this article with Sarah Yackel and Dr. Joshua Wiederman from the Mayo Clinic, and unfortunately they couldn't be here today, but we specifically are working with a group out of Harvard called the Global Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery Initiative, where we're looking at disparities in healthcare across the globe, and our subgroup is specifically looking at gender disparities. And so this became a time where I thought that maybe this, kind of niche area could come into play, where we looked at popular American literature and how it tends to portray gender disparities in healthcare. And we also have found that tends to occur across the globe as well. It's not just an issue within the United States. But in the article, I just kind of dive into, over the past year during this pandemic, I've really gotten back into reading. It's something I've kind of gotten away from in school. But specifically within Bleak House, that was the novel that jumped out to me the most in Charles Dickens, where Esther Summerson, the female protagonist, she embodies this notion of illness being more female versus disease being more male. She's stricken with what is described as a smallpox-like illness and becomes temporarily blind, but then it comes back. And so with illness, I tend to think of that as more of a subjective issue where, there's something maybe going on, but it's not treatable, it's transient, versus disease where it seems permanent, tangible, you can see it. And that oftentimes is more associated with males. And so, I've been reading quite a bit over the pandemic. And so I just started picking different books off the shelf. And it seems to be just prevalent throughout all of literature. And so one of the examples that I tend to look towards the most in popular literature is Harry Potter. So Harry, has this scar across his forehead. We can all see it. We all have read about it. It's famous and it's always there. So for me, that's disease. We see it. Versus someone like Hermione Granger or Dolores Umbridge. They are both very particular. Hermione is very particular with her time. Dolores Umbridge with all of her various knickknacks in her office and her particulars with how students act. And so a lot of times people tend to look at those two as maybe they have obsessive compulsive disorder. It's an issue, an illness in a way that, we know that it exists, but it's kind of difficult to see, especially with how mental health care is nowadays. We're more aware of the intricacies of it and that it is a legitimate medical issue. But in the past, maybe that was one of those things where it was like, I don't really know how we can treat this. And so just from an everyday perspective, Harry Potter in many ways mirrors these same issues. And so just examples tend to abound. And so the article really is just looking into what we can do to address these gender disparities based off of what we're seeing in literature. And the issue of subconscious bias comes up as well, just how we all need to realize and take a step back that we all come in with our own biases, whether they're conscious or not, and they affect the way that we give our advice and participate in the healthcare system.
Now, is there anything that we could learn specifically from classic works of literature in terms of recognizing gender disparities? And I guess, in other words, like any lessons from literature that we can use going forward?
Sure. So there have been a few authors that have addressed gender disparities in a more unique way, where they're not only attributing illness to the female characters, but it's to the male characters as well. And so moving forward, just looking at when you're reading, how disease or illness is described by authors and which characters it's attributed to, you can see whether or not those same disparities are showing up within literature. I recently got back into The Great Gatsby, and I also hadn't read Harper Lee's Go Set a Watchman. And so in The Great Gatsby, we see Daisy, described as someone that might have histrionic personality disorder, versus Tom Buchanan, who has a permanent limp from the war. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is the same kind of gender disparity issue we're seeing, where it's a mental health issue attributed to a female, and then more of a disease, a permanent entity attributed to a male. And then in Go Set a Watchman, Jim, Scout's brother, has passed away, and so permanent disease. But Scout, in many ways, kind of defies this notion of female illness. She also is struck with a number of diseases, and moving forward, in many ways, takes the role of, the primary person within Harper Lee's novel, and speaking on behalf of her father. And so with the transformation from To Kill a Mockingbird to Go Set a Watchman, even though they were written out of order, it's almost like Harper Lee decided, okay, I'm going to, kind of show that Jim is unique from Scout and Scout is unique from Jim, but they both encompass these different realms of illness versus disease within society.
We're talking to Teddy Klug. He's a clinical research fellow, and he co-wrote the Kevin MD article, Gender Disparities Medicine, How Popular Literature Mirrors 2020 Society. Teddy, as an English major, that gives you a little bit of a unique background going into medical school. So now that you finish, how has your English background individualized your medical education in contrast to your peers?
I'd always loved reading and writing growing up, but I was also interested in science. And so those seemed to be two totally different realms, two different areas of academics. But after finishing medical school, I really felt that having an English background allowed me to connect with patients in a unique way, to put myself into their shoes and just take what I've read in the past and attribute it to what I'm seeing before my very eyes. It's not the traditional route to major in English then go to medical school, but I would recommend it to anyone. It's really neat how when you read a novel, how it might seem, far long ago and in the past, but then some of the same ideas and notions like we're discussing today, they're in front of us every day we step outside our door. And so it just always was a part of my medical education, taking what I'd learned through my English degree, moving forward, how to best treat and care for patients.
As a physician, I think one of the most powerful traits that they need to have is, of course, communication. Not only do they need to communicate in front of patients, but they need to be great writers as well to share their ideas, especially on my site. If they want to change minds, they could write editorials and op-eds in a newspaper. And unfortunately, a lot of physicians, they aren't the best writers. So I guess from your English background, what are some easy tips that you could share with my clinician audience on how they could improve not only their communication skills, but their writing as well?
Definitely. So this year with research at Thomas Jefferson, I've admittedly had difficulty writing scientific articles because they're very cut and dry. There's no flourishing language or flowy, whimsical tones. It's very cut and dry and to the point. But I think when you decide to go forward and write more of an everyday, literature article, you need to put your own personality, if possible, into the piece. It's not just scientific journalism where you're stating the facts. It's okay to be, your own unique person when you're writing and to get your ideas and your personality across within the writing. And I think just moving forward, or I at least need to realize that there are different ways of writing and getting a point across. And so I've definitely boned up on my scientific writing this year. I've gotten away from the flourishy language, but it's always fun to go back and forth and to just show that, we all are multifaceted and we can all have something to contribute both in the scientific realm and then in the more personalized English literature realm.
Are there any other lessons from works of English literature that we physicians today can learn from?
Yeah, I think just it's a very prevalent issue nowadays. The idea of subconscious bias. Just when you pick up a novel or a poem and you read it, just take a step back and just look at what were your first impressions after reading that. Why do you think that was the case? What do you think in your upbringing, your background caused you to think that? And then just think about it relative to how others perceive it. And then it's also unique to go out and read the critics' comments on a novel or a poem and just see what they're thinking about it. And then you can also take into account what their subconscious biases may be. So it's no fault of our own. We all have subconscious biases, but I think it's important to also reflect on why we have those and what they are, and then specifically apply that to the healthcare realm, treating patients moving forward.
And my final question, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
If you can, just pick up a book, take the time to read it, and then see how it might affect you as a clinician moving forward. If there's anything you can glean from the author that might help you in your clinical practice, and also just to reflect on the subconscious biases moving forward.
Teddy, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight, and thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.